What is going on, IF Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to talk about why a calorie is not just a calorie. Now, this is a big thing with the if it fits your macro group, or people who are gung-ho about just trying to strip everything down to a simplified version of a calorie is a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. Now, calories do matter. Do not get me wrong. Calories do matter, but every calorie that you consume aren't all the same. And I'm going to break that down in this video. Stay tuned. Alright, so for those of you who are ready to hop on the comment section and say, wait a second, you don't know what you're talking about. Just eat less than you burn and that's it. It's as simple as that. You are simplifying it to either a disingenuous place, or you are just not completely informed on how calorie intake and calorie expenditure actually works. So now let me break this down for you. When you actually eat food, there is a thermic effect to that food. Your digestion, the muscle contraction, breaking down, absorbing nutrients from the food, that entire process actually creates a thermogenesis effect. It creates an effect of burning energy, utilizing energy, and some foods burn more than others. If we break it down to a simplistic level, just looking at the macronutrient counterpart to that food, that in and of itself can dictate how much of a thermic effect it will have when you're eating it. The dietary induced thermogenesis of protein, for example, is much higher than all of the other macronutrients, being followed by carbs and then fats. Now for protein, for example, 20 to 30% of each of those calories are utilized for absorbing and breaking down the protein itself. So if you had 100 calories of protein, 20 to 30 calories from that 100 calories would be utilized to actually break down and absorb that protein. So your net balance would be 70 calories that you took in, as opposed to 100 calories when you look at the overall big picture in terms of what's the total energy balance. So you use 30 calories of the 100 calories, thus that protein intake of 100 calories, although it's 100 calories, you're only keeping 70 of that 100. With carbs, is about 5 to 10%. For example, if it's 100 calories in carbohydrates, 10 of those calories would be used to absorb the carbohydrate. And with fats, it's even less. It's 0 to about 3%. Now, you have to understand that 10% of your daily energy expenditure comes from actually consuming food, the energy that you expend from the process of eating food. But if you increase protein intake, protein has such a significant thermic effect that it could actually over time help you burn more calories, because although you may be taking in 100 calories of protein is not the same as taking in 100 calories of carbohydrates. But it all boils down to one simple thing. How hard is it for your body to actually work with the food that you put in? So if it's really difficult for your body to break up the food and disperse it through the blood system and digest and absorb, if it's very hard for it to do that, then it's beneficial for you in terms of how much calories would be utilized for that specific food. So it isn't strictly based on just if it's protein or not. It's also based on if it's processed versus whole foods. Now, this study that was done in 2010 in the Food and Nutrition Research paper by Sadie Barr and Jonathan Wright shows just that. They had participants eat a whole food meal versus a processed meal, and they made the meals identical. Now, the meals were simply a cheese sandwich. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that ain't really that much of a whole food, but they try to make it as whole food as possible. They use whole grain, whole wheat, unprocessed cheese, all of these different things, where it's not being processed through so many different layers, versus just using white bread with processed American cheese. They made sure that the calorie count was the same. What they noticed is that the participants actually found the whole food more palatable. Although they weren't told which one was the whole food and which one isn't, I feel that, if you have any idea of food, even a slight idea of food, you would know which one is the whole food version versus the processed version. However, they weren't really told what this experiment was about. And normally it is said that processed food tends to be more palatable because it's so processed. Now, the body can easily break down processed food because it's filled with so much sugar, and sugar can just be moved into the bloodstream, quickly turn this into glucose, and then dispersed that way. So there isn't that much work that your body is doing to break it down. Simple carbohydrates do this versus complex carbohydrates. So whole foods, because it's harder to actually digest, because there's so much more that goes into digesting that, even if it's in the same vertical as being a grilled cheese sandwich, it provided a 50% increase in the thermogenesis from just eating the whole foods versus the processed food. And they had them eat the whole foods for 1 week and then come back and eat the processed food and look at their metabolic rate from their basal metabolic rate and onward throughout the day. So they actually saw that there was an increase of almost 50%. I believe it was exactly about 48.6%, something close to that number. They saw that increase just simply because they were eating whole food versus processed. Now, the calories were the same, but they were burning 50% more from that meal versus the processed meal. So calories are calories, yes, and calories is what matters. How much you take in versus how much you burn. That really matters a lot, because that's going to determine weight loss. Things like intermittent fasting can help with partitioning body fat loss as opposed to muscle tissue and glycogen and all of these other things that can carry weight. You can actually facilitate more body fat loss with intermittent fasting. And there's hormonal elements that don't even get talked about. Things like increasing your insulin or increasing ghrelin secretion. When you eat more processed foods, when you eat foods that don't have as much satiety, you can still feel hungry even though you've eaten 500 calories of something like a donut, for example, 2 donuts, and now you have about 500 calories in your system, but you still feel hungry because it wasn't satisfying. But if you ate 500 calories of something that's high in protein, that protein has a high satiety, so you'll actually feel full. But the donuts, for example, might increase your ghrelin secretion and reduce your leptin secretion, and leptin is what tells you that you're actually full. Ghrelin is what continues to tell you that you're hungry. So you end up having more of an addiction to food when you eat highly processed or high sugar foods. So those are the hormonal elements that happen where it can force you to eat more, or it can make it harder for you to eat less. And we're not even talking about that. We're just talking about the net energy balance at the end of the day. If you're eating something that takes more energy to burn it or to work with it than something else, this thing, although it carries the same calorie as this thing, is going to be more beneficial for you for weight loss, because these numbers compile over time. Even though it's just 10%, that 10% is every single day if you're consistent with the foods that you eat. And over the course of a week, in the course of a month, in the course of a year, those will be substantial losses. So I hope this video has helped you understand why a calorie is not just a calorie, but on the flip side, calories do matter. But understanding what you eat may help you understand how much you are actually burning at the end of the day. And of course, as always, guys, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon. I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. And of course, as always, guys, I'll see you on Wednesday for another FAQ. Peace!